I never expected the night my son introduced me to his fiancée's family would unravel the way it did. At 65, I thought I had seen enough of life to be immune to insults or surprises, but that evening proved me wrong. My son David had been glowing with excitement about his whirlwind engagement, eager for me to meet Jessica, the woman he claimed was his future. I agreed, determined to support him, even if I had my doubts about the speed of it all. What I didn't anticipate was Jessica's icy dismissal. With a polite smile masking her arrogance, she introduced me as, just a nobody, as though decades of my life could be reduced to nothing in a single breath. I swallowed the sting, reminding myself I was here for David. But then her father walked in, saw me, and his face drained of color. He started trembling like he'd seen a ghost. When David first told me he was getting married, the Chicago Tribune nearly slipped right out of my hands. It was a Saturday morning, and I was settled in my leather chair, coffee steaming on the side table, enjoying the small rituals of retirement. My son's voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard since he was a boy, showing me his first baseball trophy. "Dad, I've found the one," he said. "Her name's Jessica, and we're engaged." At first, I thought I had misheard him. "Engaged? When did you meet her?" "3 weeks ago," he replied, as if that were the most natural timeline in the world. I set the newspaper aside, studying him the way I used to study witnesses on the stand. David was 30, ambitious, and usually careful to a fault. He had never been reckless with money, with his career, or with his heart, or so I thought. Yet here he stood, ring already purchased, plans already in motion. "David," I said slowly, 3 weeks isn't long enough to know someone's favorite color, let alone whether you should marry them." He bristled, his jaw tightening. "I knew you'd say that. You analyze everything like it's a trial." "But Dad, love doesn't always need cross-examination. Sometimes you just know." That last phrase, "sometimes you just know," sent an ache through me. I'd said those same words to his mother 35 years ago, before our marriage unraveled in courtrooms and custody battles. He didn't know the weight those words carried, or how easily they could fracture. "Tell me about her," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "She's beautiful, smart, ambitious. Works in marketing. And her family? Well off, respectable. They live in Lincoln Park." There it was, the detail that tugged at me. Lincoln Park, the kind of neighborhood where appearances mattered more than substance, where shiny facades often hid rotten foundations. David leaned forward, eyes pleading. "She makes me happy, Dad. The happiest I've been in years. And I want you to meet her family. Tomorrow night. A dinner at their home." I hesitated. In my line of work as a former federal officer, I'd learned never to ignore instincts. Something about this felt rushed, orchestrated. But I saw the boy in his eyes, desperate for approval. "Of course," I said finally. "I'll be there." David's shoulders relaxed, his relief palpable. He clapped me on the arm, grinning like the boy who used to beg me to pitch to him in the backyard. As he left, I picked up the Tribune again but couldn't focus on the headlines. My mind wandered to Jessica. Who was she? And why did her name stir a faint unease in the back of my memory? I closed the paper and stared at the family photos lining the wall. David at 6, gap-toothed and beaming; at 16, posing awkwardly in his prom tux; at 25, shaking my hand after landing his first real job. I had raised a good man, a careful man. But good men make mistakes, especially when blinded by love. Tomorrow night, I promised myself, I would meet this Jessica. And her family. And I would find out exactly why my instincts were screaming at me not to take her at face value. Sunday felt longer than any day I'd lived in years. I woke before sunrise, the kind of restless sleep that leaves you with a tight chest and heavy eyes. David had texted me twice already, reminding me about dinner at Jessica's family home that evening. Each word carried his excitement, his eagerness for me to approve of his choice. I wanted to share in his joy. I really did. But my instincts kept gnawing at me like a dog worrying a bone. Love may blind the young, but it sharpens the vision of the old. I spent the morning pacing the living room, glancing at photographs of David's milestones, his high school graduation, his college acceptance letter pinned on the fridge, the proud smile he wore when he bought his first car. Through it all, I had always been his anchor. Now he was asking me to step into the background, to quietly endorse a decision that already felt wrong. By noon, I forced myself to stop circling the house like a caged animal. I drove to Oak Street to pick up a Jiftan old habit drilled into me from years of formal dinners and professional gatherings. A simple bouquet seemed too impersonal, but a bottle of wine. That struck the right balance between courtesy and sincerity. The clerk at the wine shop suggested a Cabernet Sauvignon, smooth, dependable, a safe choice. I tucked it carefully into a bag and drove home, rehearsing lines in my head the way I once rehearsed closing arguments. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for welcoming me into your home. Simple phrases, nothing more. But words mattered. The wrong tone could ignite suspicion, the wrong phrasing could sound like judgment. After all, I wasn't just meeting Jessica, I was stepping into her world, a world she'd already weaponized by calling me a nobody. By 5 o'clock, I stood before my closet. My suits hung in orderly rows, relics from a career that demanded authority. Too dark and I'd look intimidating. Too light and I'd look careless. I settled on a navy suit, pressed crisp, paired with a burgundy tie Lydia daughter had once said made me look trustworthy but not boring. The mirror reflected a man older than he felt, lines etched by decades of courtroom battles, eyes still sharp but heavy with caution. Would Jessica's family see me as the man I was or only as the father she had already dismissed? The drive to Lincoln Park cut through the city's pulse, honking taxis, couples strolling arm in arm, the scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. I rolled down the window, letting the autumn air cool my nerves. When I turned onto Jessica's street, my suspicions deepened. The houses weren't homes, they were showcases. Gleaming glass facades, designer gardens manicured within an inch of life, expensive cars angled in driveways like trophies. Jessica's family clearly valued image. An image, in my experience, often meant they had something to hide. I parked a block away, giving myself a moment before walking into the lion's den. The wine bag felt heavier than it should have. Inside, I rehearsed one last promise, I was here for David. Whatever happened tonight, whatever games Jessica or her family played, I would hold my ground. My son believed this was the start of his future. And I would not let him walk blind into it. The Harper residence looked more like a designer magazine spread than a family home. Sleek glass panels, brushed steel railings, the faint glow of recessed lighting spilling onto a stone pathway. It was impressive, no doubt, but cold. I rang the bell and took a steadying breath. Jessica herself answered. She wore a fitted black dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Miller," she said brightly. "Come in." Her voice was polite, but it carried a note I couldn't mistake, condescension wrapped in charm. David appeared behind her, beaming, his hand reaching to clasp my shoulder. "Dad! You made it. Doesn't the place look great?" I forced a smile. "It's certainly something." Inside, the living room gleamed with curated perfection, leather sectional sofas, a marble coffee table stacked with art books, and abstract paintings that probably cost more than my old car. There were no family photos, no clutter, no warmth, just presentation. Jessica led us toward the dining room, her heels clicking like a metronome. As we approached, I heard laughter too loud, too rehearsed. A cluster of Jessica's friends stood near the bar, sipping wine and sizing me up with quick glances. "This is my fiancé's father," Jessica announced, sweeping her arm as if she were presenting an exhibit. Her next words cut like glass. "He's well, just a regular man. Nothing special. Basically, a nobody." The laughter paused. A few nervous chuckles rippled, but most eyes turned to me, waiting for a reaction. For a moment, I said nothing. 30 years in law enforcement had trained me to absorb blows without flinching. I simply adjusted my tie and gave a courteous nod. "Pleasure to meet you all." Jessica smirked, clearly satisfied with her performance. David shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. His silence stung more than her insult. Dinner was served on a long polished table that could have seated a jury. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, each place setting arranged with surgical precision. As we sat, Jessica continued her subtle jabs, comparing David's ordinary upbringing with her cultured background, making remarks about how retirement must leave so much empty time. Each word was calculated to reduce me. To her, I was just an aging man past his prime, someone to tolerate out of obligation. I kept my composure, cutting my steak with methodical precision, nodding at the appropriate moments, even managing a faint smile when one of her friends made a toast. But beneath the calm surface, my instincts sharpened. Because people like Jessica never belittled without purpose. This was more than arrogance. This was a test, a way to establish power in her own home, to prove she could diminish me in front of David. The irony was almost amusing. She thought she was exposing my weakness. What she didn't realize was that every insult, every condescending smile, was exposing hers. As the meal wore on, I caught David glancing at me, torn between loyalty and discomfort. His knuckles whitened around his wine glass, but he never spoke up. That silence carved deeper than any of Jessica's words. By the time dessert was served, my patience was wearing thin. Yet I held steady. This wasn't my battleground, not yet. The real confrontation hadn't arrived. Because the moment Jessica's parents walked through that door, everything would change. The meal stretched on like a slow trial where the verdict was already decided. Jessica's friends eventually left, but the damage of her introduction lingered. Every clink of cutlery, every sip of wine carried the weight of unspoken judgment. Jessica dominated the conversation, her tone airy but sharpened with hidden edges. "David tells me you're retired now, Mr. Miller. It must be nice having nothing pressing to do. My father says retirement is when men either take up golf or just fade into the background." She laughed lightly, expecting others to join. David forced a smile, though it looked more like a grimace. I dabbed my mouth with my napkin, keeping my tone even. Retirement isn't about fading. It's about choosing what matters after years of carrying responsibilities. Her eyes flickered, annoyed that I hadn't taken the bait. "Well," she continued, "not everyone was meant for influence. Some of us lead, and some of us simply watch." I caught the way David stiffened beside her, but again, he said nothing. His silence burned hotter than her barbs. The main course arrived, perfectly seared lamb chops, garnished with sprigs of rosemary. Jessica used the moment to lecture about fine dining, how her family always appreciated the finer things, while David's upbringing had been humble but sweet. I cut my lamb slowly, deliberately, reminding myself of years spent controlling my temper under harsher cross-examinations. I had faced mob bosses, corrupt officials, and criminals who'd threatened my life. Compared to them, Jessica was a child playing at power. Yet the sting of her disrespect was real, not because of what she said, but because David let her. Halfway through the meal, she leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine. "My parents will be here any moment. They're very traditional, you know. Appearances matter to them. It's important they see that David isn't carrying unnecessary baggage." The word baggage landed like a slap. To her, I wasn't a father. I was a liability. I set my fork down carefully, folding my hands. "Family isn't baggage, Jessica. It's foundation." Her lips curled into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see if my parents agree." The doorbell rang just then, sharp and decisive. Jessica sprang up, smoothing her dress, excitement flashing across her face. "That's them," she said, voice high with anticipation. David glanced at me, uneasy, as if sensing the storm gathering just outside the door. I held his gaze for a moment, steady, the way I once did before sending junior attorneys into a courtroom. "Hold your ground," my look said. Jessica disappeared toward the entryway, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The murmur of greetings drifted back, her warm, affectionate tone contrasted so harshly with the disdain she'd shown me. Then came the shuffle of footsteps. Heavy, measured. A man's voice, low and authoritative. And then another, lighter, a woman's, carrying warmth. I straightened in my chair, instinct tightening my spine. This was the moment. The dining room door widened, and Jessica's parents stepped inside. Her mother, elegant and smiling, carried the gentle presence of someone practiced in hospitality. But her father, his eyes swept the room with the sharpness of a man trained to size people up in seconds. When his gaze landed on me, the color drained from his face. His confident stride faltered. A tremor shook his hand as he reached for the back of a chair. Jessica, oblivious, gestured grandly. "Mom, Dad, this is David's father." Just a nobody, really. Nothing important. The room froze. Her mother's smile wavered. David inhaled sharply. But it was her father's reaction that changed everything. His lips parted, eyes locked on mine as recognition spread like wildfire across his expression. His hand gripped the chair tighter, knuckles whitening. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "Oh God." And he began to tremble. The silence after Jessica's words pressed down heavier than the chandelier above us. For a moment, no one moved. Her father, Robert Harper, as I would later confirm, stood frozen, his hand still gripping the back of the chair. His knuckles whitened, his breathing shallow, and a tremor spread through his shoulders. Jessica frowned, confused by the shift in atmosphere. "Dad? What's wrong?" Robert didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on mine, wide and haunted. I knew that look. I had seen it on defendants in a courtroom, men who suddenly realized the evidence was stacked against them, men who felt the weight of consequences descending. Finally, Robert found his voice. "You." The single word scraped out of him like broken glass. "Me," I said evenly, keeping my expression unreadable. Jessica laughed nervously. "What is going on?" "Dad, this is David's father. He's no one important." Robert spun toward her, his voice sharp. "Shut up, Jessica." The command cut through the room like a whip. Jessica's jaw dropped, stunned. Even David leaned back, startled by the sudden authority in his future father-in-law's tone. Robert turned back to me, sweat beading along his hairline. "Two thought you'd retired. I didn't think I'd ever have to see you again." His words were confirmation. He knew me. Not as David's father, not as a retiree, but as the man I used to be. "Life has a way of bringing people back together," I said quietly. Jessica's mother, Evelyn, placed a hand on her husband's arm. "Robert, what is it? Who is he?" Robert shook his head, unable to look away from me. "He was there. Years ago. The investigation. The trial. I'll never forget that face." His voice trembled now. "God help me." David looked between us, utterly lost. "Dad, what is he talking about?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I wanted to hear more. Wanted Robert to dig his own grave with the words spilling from his lips. Jessica's face reddened with frustration. "This is ridiculous. He's just some retiree. Why are you acting like he's—" She stopped, catching the unmistakable fear in her father's expression. For the first time, her confidence faltered. Robert wiped a shaking hand across his mouth. His eyes darted around the room, searching for escape. "We shouldn't be here. This dinner was a mistake." Evelyn gasped softly. "Robert, stop. You're scaring everyone." I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands on the table. My voice stayed calm, controlled. No need to be afraid. I'm just here tonight as David's father. But Robert knew better. His trembling betrayed him. He remembered the past, and he knew exactly what I was capable of. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica had introduced me as a nobody, but the man she admired most in the world, her father, was trembling because he knew I was far from it. The room hung thick with tension. Jessica stared at her father in disbelief, David stared at me with questions in his eyes, and Evelyn hovered between them, desperate to smooth the jagged edges. Finally, Robert lowered himself into a chair, as if his legs could no longer carry him. His voice was hoarse. We can't go through with this. Jessica, you don't understand who you've brought into our lives. Jessica shook her head. What are you talking about? But Robert didn't answer her. He looked at me again, his face pale, his lips trembling. And in that moment, I knew the truth. The real story of this family was about to break open, and Jessica's cruel dismissal of me as a nobody would be the very thing that exposed everything they had tried to bury. Robert's trembling hand gripped the edge of the table as if the polished wood could anchor him against the tide of memory. His daughter still demanded answers, her voice sharp with youthful arrogance, but he couldn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on me, the way a cornered man fixes on the one holding the evidence. Robert, I said quietly, perhaps we should speak privately. Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but her mother laid a gentle hand on her arm. Let them talk, Evelyn whispered. Her face was pale, but her instincts told her this wasn't an ordinary argument. Reluctantly, Robert rose from his chair. His legs moved stiffly, carrying him toward the hallway like a man being marched to judgment. I followed, my steps measured, every sense sharpened. We stopped in a study lined with bookshelves and dimly lit by a brass lamp. Robert shut the door behind us, his hand trembling against the knob. You shouldn't be here, he muttered. Neither should you, I countered. But here we are. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Do you know what will happen if Jessica learns the truth? I folded my arms. That depends on how much truth you intend to share. He pressed a hand to his forehead, the mask of a respected father cracking. It was 20 years ago. I thought it was buried. The Castrelli case, the bribes, the falsified records. I was just a lieutenant back then. You were the one who dismantled the whole operation. Recognition slid into place. I remembered the trial. A network of dirty cops working with organized crime. Files disappearing, witnesses intimidated. And I remembered Robert Harper's name, a young officer who narrowly escaped charges after testifying against his own. He had kept his badge, but his reputation had never recovered inside the department. You remember, Robert whispered hoarsely. I remember, I confirmed. He sank into a leather chair, his hands covering his face. I thought if I raised my daughter in comfort, if I gave her every advantage, the past would stay buried. She thinks I'm honorable. A man to be proud of. I studied him. The proud, arrogant Jessica had built her identity on a father she thought untouchable. And now that father was breaking apart before my eyes. Robert, I said slowly, I didn't come here tonight to expose you. I came because my son loves your daughter. I wanted to see if this family was worthy of him. He lowered his hands, eyes hollow. And now you see the truth. We're not worthy. Silence hung heavy in the study. My instincts told me to press, to demand every detail, to build the case as I always had. But another voice whispered that this wasn't my courtroom anymore. You have a choice, I finally said. You can keep hiding and let your daughter build her life on a lie. Or you can tell her the truth and hope she loves you enough to forgive it. Robert shook his head violently. She'll hate me. She'll hate all of us. And she'll leave David. You'd ruin them both. His fear was raw, naked. Not fear of prison anymore, but fear of losing the pedestal his daughter had placed him on. I leaned closer, my voice calm but edged with steel. I don't need to ruin anyone. You're doing that yourself. But let me be clear, if your daughter or my son are dragged into the shadows of your past, I won't hesitate to bring everything into the light. Robert's eyes widened. He recognized the resolve in my tone. He'd seen it once before in a courtroom, and he knew it wasn't an empty threat. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of a mantel clock. Then Robert nodded slowly, defeated. I'll keep her away from you. She doesn't need to know. That's not your decision alone, I said. She's already entangled with my son. And if she treats him the way she treated me tonight, then she deserves to know exactly what shaped her arrogance. Robert flinched, shame flickering across his face. She gets that from me. No, I said firmly. Fear shaped her. Fear she doesn't even understand. We both turned at the sound of footsteps in the hall. Jessica's voice called through the door, impatient and demanding, Dad? What's taking so long? Robert closed his eyes, the weight of years bowing his shoulders. God help me, he whispered again. When I opened the door, Jessica stood there, arms crossed, suspicion clouding her features. She looked from her father's pallor to my steady expression. What happened? She demanded. Robert tried to speak, but no words came. His hands still shook at his sides. I met her gaze. Nothing you need to worry about yet. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't push further. She turned back toward the dining room, her heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. Robert lingered in the doorway, his face ashen. Please, he whispered to me as we followed. Don't destroy her image of me. I gave no answer. Because I knew the truth has a way of destroying illusions all on its own. When we returned to the dining room, the mood had shifted from awkward to suffocating. Evelyn sat stiffly at the table, her hands folded so tightly around her glass that I thought it might shatter. Jessica paced near the window, her arms crossed, heels tapping against the hardwood like a clock counting down to an explosion. David glanced between us with furrowed brows, sensing the storm but unable to name it. What's going on? He asked. What happened in there? Nothing, Robert said quickly, his voice clipped. Jessica turned on him, her suspicion sharp as broken glass. Don't lie to me, Dad. You've been shaking since you saw him. And you, she swung toward me, her finger pointed like an accusation, you know something too. What is it? Why are you both acting like I'm a child who can't handle the truth? Her voice cracked at the end, but the anger behind it was real. Evelyn tried to soothe her. Jessica, honey, maybe this isn't the time. Jessica slammed her palm against the table. Then when is the time? Tomorrow? After the wedding? Or never? Tell me. The room went still. Robert's shoulders sagged as though the weight of decades pressed down at once. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at me with a silent plea, but I offered nothing. Because this wasn't my secret to keep. Robert finally exhaled a shuddering breath. Jessica, years ago, I was part of something I shouldn't have been. Something that nearly destroyed me. Jessica's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? His voice was low, broken. Corruption. Bribes. Cover-ups. I was young, stupid, and weak. And the man standing in front of you, he gestured toward me, was the prosecutor who exposed it all. The words dropped into the room like lead. Jessica's face went pale, her arms uncrossing slowly as if the strength drained from them. You, she whispered, turning toward me. You're the reason. Robert cut in. Don't blame him. He did his job. I made my choices, and they almost cost me everything. I should have gone to prison. The only reason I didn't is because I turned on the others. I testified, saved my own skin. Jessica staggered back a step as if she'd been struck. All these years you told me you left the force because of politics. You said you were tired of the system. I lied, Robert admitted, his voice cracking. I lied to protect you. To protect your image of me. I couldn't stand for my daughter to know her father was a coward. Jessica shook her head violently. No. No, this isn't real. You're exaggerating. Mom, tell me this isn't true. Evelyn's silence was answer enough. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't deny it. Jessica turned back to me, her expression torn between fury and disbelief. And you knew? You've been sitting there all night, letting me insult you, letting me treat you like garbage, while you held this over my family? I met her gaze calmly. I let you speak your mind because I wanted to see who you truly were. But tonight showed me more than your arrogant sight showed me where it came from. You inherited a legacy of fear and pride without ever knowing it. Her lips trembled. You think you're better than us? No, I said evenly. I think truth matters more than image. Your father knows that now. The question is, do you? Jessica's glare softened for the first time. She looked at Robert, who sat slumped in his chair, his once proud shoulders collapsed. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Because I didn't want you to grow up hating me, Robert replied, his voice barely audible. I thought if I buried the past deep enough, you'd never have to carry the shame. The silence stretched, raw and heavy. David reached for Jessica's hand, but she pulled away, pacing again. And now it all comes out the night before my wedding. Her laugh was brittle, the sound of a dam cracking. Perfect timing. Robert buried his face in his hands. Evelyn moved to his side, rubbing his shoulder, but her eyes stayed locked on her daughter. This changes nothing about tomorrow, Jessica said finally, though her voice shook. I love David. I'm not walking away because of your mistakes. Her defiance was fierce, but her eyes betrayed the turmoil inside. David spoke gently. Jessica, I don't care about the past. What matters is us. She turned to him, tears brimming. Then you'd better be ready, because if his world, she jabbed her finger toward me, collides with ours again, it won't just be my father who pays the price. The warning stung, but I said nothing. Because I knew the story wasn't finished. Truth never stayed buried, and sooner or later, the final reckoning would come. The dining room had become a courtroom, though no gavel struck and no jury sat in the benches. Every glance, every silence, every tremor of breath was testimony. Jessica stood rigid near the window, her dress shimmering faintly under the chandelier's glow. David hovered at her side, his hand outstretched but unheld. Evelyn sat at the table with folded hands, lips moving in silent prayer. And Robert looked like a man awaiting sentencing, shoulders bowed, eyes hollow. I remained standing, watching the family unravel in real time. Jessica finally turned, her voice brittle but fierce. So this is it. My whole life, I've admired a man who was hiding corruption. My fiancé's father is a prosecutor who watched it all happen. And tomorrow, I'm supposed to walk down the aisle as if nothing's wrong. David stepped closer. Jessica, don't let this destroy us. We're not our parents' mistakes. She spun on him. Aren't we? Everything about tonight screams legacy. My father's sins. His secrets. Your father's silence. And me caught in the middle. Her voice cracked, and tears finally broke free. How am I supposed to promise forever when I don't even know what truth looks like? The words pierced deeper than any accusation. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Robert pushed himself to his feet, trembling but resolute. Jessica, he said hoarsely, if you hate me for what I did, I deserve it. But don't punish yourself or David for my cowardice. You asked for the truth, and now you have it. I failed as an officer. I failed as a man. But if I can give you one gift before you marry, let it be honesty. His confession hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Jessica wiped her cheeks, her jaw clenched. She turned to me. And you, what do you want? To humiliate us? To use this as leverage? To make sure I regret ever calling you a nobody? Her words were sharp, but her eyes searched mine for something more. I stepped forward, my voice steady. What I want is for my son to marry someone who values truth. Tonight, you saw your father as he isn't the image he sold you, but the man beneath it. Tomorrow, you must decide if you can face that truth and still build a life rooted in something real. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Evelyn rose, placing a trembling hand on her daughter's arm. Sweetheart, your father has spent years trying to protect you from shame. Wrongly, yes, but out of love. You don't have to carry his past as your burden. You get to choose your future. Jessica's knees weakened, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. David caught her gently, guiding her back toward a chair. She allowed it this time, leaning into him, her tears soaking his jacket. The silence that followed was not empty, it was heavy with decisions unspoken. Finally, Jessica lifted her head, her eyes raw but clearer. Tomorrow there will still be a wedding. But it won't be about perfection. It won't be about appearances. It will be about starting honestly, no matter how ugly the past is. Robert's head bowed, relief and shame mingling. Evelyn wept quietly beside him. David squeezed Jessica's hand, his face alight with hope. And me? I felt the tension in my chest loosen at last. Because beneath all the chaos, there was truth, and truth, once spoken, had a way of setting everyone free. I gathered my coat from the back of the chair. Then my work here is done, I said softly. Tomorrow, I'll be there not as a prosecutor, not as a judge, but simply as David's father. That's all I've ever wanted. Jessica looked at me, her expression conflicted but softer than before. I was wrong, she whispered. You're not a nobody. I gave a small nod. Neither is your father. But now you know being somebody isn't about image. It's about facing truth, even when it terrifies you. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. A new day had begun.